So, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Dora. I'm one of the organizers of Qesher, and there's also Sebastian here. You can find us both under the name Qesher. I'll just say a couple of words about us for those of you who haven't joined us in previous events. So normally what we do is introducing Jewish communities from all over the world. We invite speakers who share with us the history, the heritage, and the culture of the Jewish community of their city or their country. So actually we are welcoming back Ruth Behar today because she's presented to us before about the Jews of Cuba. But we recently started a new series in which we introduce books that are somehow related to this theme. So we invite authors who have written books that are somehow about the Jewish diaspora or Jewish life around the world. And today we are very happy to welcome Ruth Behar, who was born in Cuba, grew up in New York. She has an amazing story. She's written many books and poetry, and I will ask her to introduce herself more in detail because really she has a wonderful record. She's also a professor. She's done a lot of things. So she will introduce herself more in detail. Today, we are welcoming her as the author of Across So Many Seas, which recently was published both in English and in Spanish. And she's going to share with us about this novel. And after her presentation, we will have time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will try to get to all the questions after the presentation. So Ruth, the stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dora, for that beautiful introduction. Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you for creating Qesher. It's such a wonderful organization, and I'm so glad to be part of it and to be able to talk about my new book, Across So Many Seas. I was not expecting to have very many people come to this event, so I'm really delighted that you're all here. I just want to thank you for taking the time wherever you are, whether it's afternoon or evening or middle of the day. Thank you so much for taking the time to join this conversation. So I'm presenting my new book, and as Dora just said, I'm so happy that it's now in Spanish, just released on March 19th, A Través de los Mares, and Across So Many Seas in English. So now it's in both languages, which is really very, very exciting. And so I'm assuming, I see that some of you have read the book, but I'm assuming that most of you haven't. So I've prepared kind of an introduction to the book and to the way it's structured and some of the themes and characters, if that sounds like a good idea. I have some images and some text. I'll read a little bit from the book as well, and then try to not go on for too long, maybe not more than 30 minutes, so that we have the rest of the time to talk with one another. Does that sound good to everybody? That's a good plan? Okay, great. So let me see what I can do here with share screen and see if that's working. Okay, I believe that's working. Can you see that? The cover there in English and Spanish, and you see that there's a young person, a young woman kind of looking out to the horizon, and that she has an oud there in her left hand, and that's very important to the story, as you'll see in a moment. So for this book, I challenged myself and I decided to write it in a way that I had never written a book before. I decided that I would have four protagonists, four characters living in four places in four different times. And it just kind of came to me from the very, very beginning. I had this outline in mind, a very, very short outline with the idea of the four girls, all of them 12 years old, and all of them Sephardic. And I wasn't sure how they would all connect, but I knew that they would. And that's really how I started. I'm amazed at how little I knew when I started, except that I have been thinking about Sephardic topics for a long time. As Dora said, I'm a cultural anthropologist and also a writer. I've been writing fiction for young people for the last 10 years, and I've written both middle grade and young adult novels and picture books. And And then I'm also an anthropologist, and I've done research in Spain and Mexico, and I've gone back many times to Cuba, where I was born, and I've worked on the Jewish community in Cuba. And over 20 years ago, I made a documentary called Adio Querida, which is about the Sephardic community in Cuba and the Sephardic Cuban diaspora in the United States. So I've been thinking about these topics for a long time, but had never attempted to write a Sephardic novel. This was kind of my jumping into something that was very new and different for me. And so I had this idea that one girl, Benvenida, would be living in 1492 Spain. She'd be part of the community that chooses to leave Spain rather than choose conversion to Catholicism. I started with Benvenida, and then I went on to Reina, living in 1923 in Turkey, and then Alegra, living in Cuba in 1961, and then Paloma in 2003 in Miami. And that's kind of where I started, and I had to figure out what the stories of each of these girls would be and how they would connect and how they would be connected with one another and with the Sephardic heritage that they share. So that's where I began, and this idea of Across So Many Seas. So it's a book that shows a journey to many places and truly crossing many, many seas. It's a journey that in many ways mirrors the journey of my own Sephardic family. I'm Sephardic on my father's side and Ashkenazi on my mother's side. So I grew up with the two herencias, the two cultural legacies. And the inspiration for this story was my paternal grandmother, who you see here with my paternal grandfather, Rebecca and Isaac. And they met in Cuba, but they were from the same town in Turkey, a town called Silivri, not far from Istanbul. And my grandmother had a very interesting story, or so I thought. She was sent to Cuba very, very young, all by herself from Turkey. Her parents sent her, and she never saw her parents again. She did eventually, many, many, many decades later, be reunited with her two sisters, but she didn't see them for a very long time, and she never saw her brother again. But it was this mystery of why was she sent to Cuba. Some people in the family thought that she had been sent on an arranged marriage to Cuba, but then when she arrived, the man she was supposed to marry had married someone else. And so she then went to live with an uncle, the only family she had in Havana. And the interesting thing, coming back to the oud, is that she brought this instrument with her, the oud. And the story goes that she played the oud and that she sang old Sephardic songs. But that after she married, she stopped singing and she stopped playing the oud, but that the oud hung from a nail on the wall. So that's what I knew, and I found the story so mysterious and wanted to see how it could inspire a novel. So that was the inspiration. And and just thinking about different Jewish communities, often the Sephardic and Mizrahi communities are forgotten when people think about Jewishness. And this is something that I've been very interested in changing and bringing Sephardic stories into our literature, into our intellectual world. So Benvenida, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Benvenida in 1492. So her name, so all the names are also significant of the different characters. Her name is somewhat ironic because bienvenida, as we say in contemporary Spanish, means welcome. And so her name means welcome, and for many years, her family and her community was welcome in Spain, but then eventually not welcome with the Edict of Expulsion. So her name, represents welcome and unwelcome at the same time. And so her story takes off after the Edict of the Expulsion, which at the very, very beginning of the book, she's hearing this edict being read in the Plaza Mayor in Toledo. And here's a facsimile copy of what the edict looked like in 1492. So I always found that so interesting, this whole story of the expulsion, and wanted to see how I could make it comprehensible for all readers, for younger readers and adult readers as well. It just was such a dramatic moment in Spanish history and in Jewish history. So I start the book there with the Edict of the Expulsion being read on a March day, a cold March day. And interestingly, one of the things that I found in doing my research, because I did a lot of research on this time period, was this chronicle of the 1492 expulsion. It was a chronicle by a priest of that era who actually was watching as Jewish people were leaving, trying to get to the ports, to be able to get out of Spain in time, because there was a 3 month period, and they had to leave by that time. And so, just to read you a portion of it, they traveled along the roads and through the fields with great difficulty and misfortune, some falling and others rising, some dying, others being born, and others falling ill, until there was no Christian who did not grieve for them. Wherever they went, they were offered baptism, and some in their affliction converted and stayed behind, but very few. The rabbis encouraged them, and they made the women and young people sing and play tambourines and timbrels to keep up their spirits. So I found this so interesting, this portion of this chronicle, this idea that they were trying to convert them, like even as they were trying to leave Spain, but also that some were dying, some were being born, some were falling ill. And all of that inspired the writing of this first part of the story, and kind of the things that Benvenida witnesses as she makes the journey with her family to the port of Valencia to be able to leave Spain, and the idea that there were priests trying to offer them baptism really until till the last moment, but that very few converted. And then finally, that the women and young people were singing and playing tambourines. I just found that so interesting that they were departing and they were singing. So I wanted to incorporate that into the story, and I do. And as they're leaving, they are singing. They have stones thrown at them. Benvenida has stones thrown at her by two girls who were her friends, but whose families have converted, so they're no longer in the same religious community. And these girls are throwing stones at Benvenida, and she's so sad. And her father says, "No, let's sing." And they sing as they're leaving Toledo, because the story, I don't know if I mentioned this, the story begins in Toledo, right? In this very iconic city where there was once a lot of wonderful coexistence between Christians, Muslims, and Jews. And so that's where I set the story of Benvenida. So they're leaving Toledo and trying to get to the port to be able to leave Spain safely. So basically, Jews were given that choice in 1492. They could convert to Catholicism if they wanted to stay in their country, in Spain. And if they didn't convert, they had to leave and be able to hold on to their religious beliefs. So that was the choice. And I was trying to imagine what that choice would have felt like, and how a young person, a 12-year-old girl, would have lived through that experience. And so Benvenida, I decided that she would be a literate girl. That was not very common in that period in the 15th century. Very few girls could read and write, but her mother comes from a family of printers, so that's what I decided. Her mother would come from a family of printers, and her mother teaches her how to read and write. But Benvenida goes a step further. She doesn't just read and write, she writes poems, and her mother's encouraging her to write poems, which is not something girls should be doing. It's like, okay that she's reading and writing, she comes from a family of printers, but writing poems is kind of going a step too far. So she's writing these poems secretly, even though her father's supportive of her literacy. Writing poems would be a bit much. So she's writing these poems with her mother's support. And just as they are about to leave Toledo and take to the road, she's smelling the almond marzipan of the land of Toledo. And to this day, those of you who've been know that this masapan is very much a part of the city of Toledo. So she's, taking in the scent of the marzipan, of the masapan that she's going to miss so much. And then she writes a few words on a parchment, and they have a courtyard in the back of their house, and she decides to leave behind a parchment where she has written some words, and she doesn't know quite why she's doing that, but she wants to leave some of her words in Toledo, and she just puts it into the crevice of a wall around their house just before the departure. And there's a scene, I don't know, maybe I'll leave it for the end in case there isn't time. But there's a scene that I like very much where she is seeing her younger cousin, who's named Medium. She's seeing her younger cousin, Medium. Her family has decided to stay until they're the one to convert, and they have this goodbye, and she's trying to explain to her younger cousin, Medium, who's like 6 years old, why they're leaving, and Medium doesn't quite understand. It's a very beautiful moment in the story, but I'll leave that for later. If there's time, I'll read that to you. But this goodbye is very difficult, and it made me think that a lot of families at that time must have been very divided, with some choosing to stay and some choosing to leave. And so as they make the journey to the port of Valencia and eventually get all the way to Turkey, Benvenida is wondering, is pondering whether they made the right decision. Her father is a Hazan in the community, and so it was very important to him to maintain his religious identity. But she's wondering about father's sisters, Leah and Raquel, who have chosen to stay and to convert, and wonders if it would have been better to have converted because she feels so broken from this terrible long journey that they're making to try to leave Spain. So then from there, we go on to the next girl, and I recognize that there's a big time difference between 1492 and 1923. But I wanted to see what remains of that heritage from 1492 in more recent generations. And so I decided that we would then from there move on to 1923 in Turkey, and we're now seeing Reina. And so Reina is living at the time of the Turkish War of Independence, and Turkey's becoming a nation, no longer part of the Ottoman Empire. Growing nationalism is happening, and they are enforcing the speaking of Turkish to everybody, which is a complex thing for the Sephardic community at that time because they have been accustomed to speaking Ladino. They, of course, also speak Turkish, but they don't want to lose their connection to their language, which is one of the most fascinating things about the Sephardic community is that they have held on to the Spanish of the nation or the country, the homeland that expelled them so long ago. So just showing you here a newspaper, a Ladino newspaper from the Ottoman Empire, just La Época here, which you can see. So this was very important, and there was a lot of concern that they would lose their language and their traditions and heritage. And so there's a moment where Reina's father talks about this, about how they've held on to the language for all these years. And she's relieved to hear Papa say this because she too loves our Spanish, and our Jewish community continues to speak it, even though we were forced out of Spain centuries ago. So the language is very important, and Reina is a girl who plays the oud, so she's kind of inspired by my grandmother. She's a young girl who plays the oud. She's been taught by her mother. Her mother has taught her Sephardic love songs, and she loves them and she sings them. And Reina also is kind of a melancholy girl. The way I describe her is she's kind of born, carrying this kind of melancholy burden from the time she was very, very young. And so she's this oud player, just like my grandmother. And so what happens to Reina? Reina's story is that she goes to a party. She's also 12, and her father has told her not to go to this party. It's a party that's taking place after a parade celebrating Turkey's independence, so Turkey becoming a nation. And her father has specifically told her not to go. She has a friend who is Muslim, Sadiq, and they've been friends for their whole lives. They've shared the same courtyard since they were young children, and they go together to this party where they're expecting that there will be girls and boys, but there are only boys, it turns out. And Reina goes, and she's aware that she might or that she very likely will be punished for this. But she agrees to play one of her very favorite songs that Mima, her mother, has taught her. And I saw that Rina Ben Mayor is here, and I'm sure you could sing this better than me, but I'll try to sing just these first few lines of the song. So this is a song that we see it comes in and out of the book. En la mar hay una torre. En la mar hay una torre. En la torre una ventana. En la ventana una hija que a los marineros llama. In the sea there is a tower, and the tower a window, at the window a daughter who calls to the sailors. So it's a song about freedom, wanting freedom, being, cast away in a tower in the sea. Anyway, I won't try to explain the song because songs can't really be explained, but it's a song that's very important to the story, definitely to Reina's stories and to the stories that come afterwards. And so anyway, what happens to Reina is her father is furious at her for what she has done and how she has marred her reputation and potentially that of her two younger sisters. And so, as punishment, he sends her off to Cuba. So she goes off to Cuba. She's married off to a man who will wait 3 years to marry her when she's 15, and off she goes to Cuba and doesn't see her parents again. So that's Reina's story. Then we get to Alegra's story. It's 1961 in Cuba, and Alegra is Reina's daughter, growing up in Cuba, growing up at the time of the revolution, and very excited about the changes that Fidel Castro and the revolution are bringing about at this time. She's 12, very idealistic, and she's especially excited about the literacy campaign. And I wanted literacy to come back as a theme. We have literacy with Benvenida, we have literacy in a different way with Reina through the songs, and here we have a different practice of literacy in Cuba in 1961, which was the year of the literacy campaign in Cuba. The revolution begins in 59 and 61. They decide to bring about this literacy campaign, and it's very interesting. And Alegra which means joy, happiness. She's just very excited about participating. She's grown up in Havana, right by the port of Havana, and she's excited about the idea of bringing an education to farmers in the countryside who don't have schooling, who are not literate, and tells her mother, imagine how sad you'd be if you couldn't read your sister's letters and write back to them. We need to share the riches we have here in the city so all Cubans can live well. So she gets her mother's permission, not her father's permission. She gets her mother's permission to participate in Cuba's literacy campaign. And it's very interesting. A lot of young girls and young women participated in this campaign. For most of them, it was their first opportunity to do anything outside the home. Girls were very overprotected in this period in the late 50s, early 60s. And so for Alegra, this was a big adventure, but also something that she felt very, very strongly about and decides to participate in, and goes off to the countryside and ends up teaching these two elderly farmers, Gloria and Alfredo, how to read and write. And so it's really an experience that she's loving very, very much. She's there with a girl from her building, an Afro-Cuban girl named Teresita. Teresita believes in the Virgin of Regla, also known as Yemaya, and she brings a little statuette of the Virgin of Regla with her, but she hides it because she knows that the revolution is downplaying religion and suppressing religion. And also Alegra is wearing a Jewish star, but also hides it for the same reason. So the theme of religion comes up, and what you can and can't do already so early at the beginning of the revolution. And so Allegra starts to understand somewhat that that there is some propaganda happening here, that it's not just teaching people how to read, but it's teaching people to support the revolution. So they're learning F for Fidel, right, or V for Victoria. So she's starting to understand that it's that there's some indoctrination here as well. She doesn't have those terms yet, but she's starting to see that this isn't quite what she hoped or what she expected that it would be. But she participates nevertheless wholeheartedly. But then everything changes when her father gets arrested. Her father is a street peddler, and he's peddling shirts and things like that, and he's basically been told to stop because no more private enterprise is being allowed as the revolution turns communist. But he continues to want to peddle and is arrested for that and speaks back. And so eventually it becomes clear that her mother and father are going to have to leave Cuba, and as a result, she too, Allegra, will have to leave. And so something very interesting happens. It's something I've heard a lot about from Cubans. When they left Cuba, a lot of them sewed jewelry into their clothing to be able to take it out of Cuba, because you couldn't take any jewelry out of the country in those first years of the revolution. And so here's this moment where Allegra's mother, Reina, is sewing the Jewish star, the necklace with the Jewish star, sewing it into the hem of her dress, and telling her, when you're in Miami, open the seam, but be careful, Allegra, that you don't tear the fabric. I'll be careful, Mama, I promise. Mama looks at me with tears in her eyes. I can't believe I have to send you away by yourself. I'm so sorry. So she herself got sent away, and now she has to send her daughter away as well. And so they had hoped that they could all leave together, but that isn't possible. And Allegra is sent out by herself with the Pedro Pan operation, which was happening at that time in 61, where children, Cuban minors, were sent out of Cuba to the US, primarily to Miami. Many of them, as many as 15,000, were sent in this period. All of them minors who could quickly get their visas to come to the US, while visas for adults take much longer to process. So the kids were sent out, and many of them were then reunited with their families a few months or years later, but some were never reunited with their parents again. So it was a very complex operation that took place at that time, and Allegra ends up being one of the Pedro Pan children. And for the most part, the kids that left were Catholic and were sent out through the Catholic Church in Cuba, but there were some Jewish kids also sent out. And in fact, I have a cousin who was sent out of Cuba this way. So that's why I wanted to incorporate this part of Cuban history into the story as well. And Allegra having to travel to the US all by herself and start again a new life all by herself. And then we get to the last girl, to Paloma, which means dove. You know, Paloma means dove. It's 2003. It's Miami. And she is the daughter of Allegra and the granddaughter of Reina. And you see here, there at the bottom of the image, in La Mar hay una torre, you see the song sheet for the song. And so Paloma is a daughter of an Afro-Cuban father and a Sephardic Cuban mother. And so the book begins, not the book, the Paloma section, excuse me, the Paloma section begins with she and her father saying goodbye, going to a memorial event for the great queen of salsa, Celia Cruz, who died in 2003. And I grew up definitely listening to her music. My parents were always playing her music. And in fact, there was a memorial for her in Miami and another one in New York. And my father went to the memorial in New York. That's like how close people were to Celia Cruz and to everything she represented through her Cuban music, and the fact that, curiously and interestingly, that she insisted on only singing in Spanish. So she only sang in Spanish, though living in the United States since the early 60s. So she really, held on very strongly to her Cuban identity and to the Spanish language. So there was this big farewell event for Celia Cruz at Miami's Freedom Tower in 2003. And I thought it would be really interesting for this last section with Paloma to begin there, with saying goodbye to Celia Cruz and her father telling her about his memories of Celia Cruz and how it was illegal in Cuba to have a Celia Cruz album. So kind of connecting the Cuban salsa tradition with the tradition of Sephardic songs, and these are two traditions that Paloma is inheriting through her double heritage. So it begins there. And then the story goes on with Paloma going with her grandmother, Reina, her mom, Allegra, and her father. They decide to take a vacation in Spain. And as Paloma is talking to her grandmother Reina, she learns that her great grandmother's last name was Toledano, and she thinks, oh, Toledano, then we have to go to Toledo. And so they go to Toledo, the family goes to Toledo, and of course they go to the Museo Sephardi, the Sephardic Museum, which is there in Toledo, which I'm sure many of you have been to, and it's a really fascinating, for me, fascinating magical place. And it has these Jewish symbols there on the facade. You can see the menorah, the tree of life, the shofar, etc. And what's fascinating about it is that it was formerly El Tránsito Synagogue, a 14th century synagogue, and though the building was used for many, many different things throughout the century, somehow underneath and through restoration, they were able to salvage so much of what was there originally, these incredible etchings and, as you can see, inscriptions in Hebrew. And so Paloma is there, with her family, and they end up with a very interesting tour guide, Mariluz, who's convinced that maybe her family descends from conversos, from those who converted in the 15th century. She has memories of like her grandmother never serving pork, etc. And so, sorry, I see this. Okay. Um, so, so it's all very interesting that this person is guiding them through this trip to the museum. And anyway, and Paloma notices that there is an interesting almondy kind of scent to Toledo and does end up trying the mazapanes at Mariluz's house. And then at the very end, not to give away the ending too quickly to all of you who haven't read it yet, but let's just say that the parchment that Benvenida left behind seems to make an appearance at the end, and we have Paloma there wondering about all this, wondering about these connections. And I'll just read you this part. When they gazed at these same stars, as she's thinking about her ancestors, did they wish for some of the same things I do? Freedom, a home where we are welcome and where we can welcome others. I walked to the edge of the courtyard and touched the cool stone wall. I imagined the girl who lived here all those centuries ago, the girl who wrote those words on a parchment and decided to hide her message deep in one of the wall's crevices, hoping it might be found and mean something to someone like me. And that's the end of my presentation. Yeah, I think I'll stop there so that we have time for more for discussion and Q&A, and happy to tell you anything more that you'd like to know about the book. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. And I just let you all of you know that tomorrow we will send out this recording, and also we will send out the links where you can buy the book either in English or in Spanish also. Right, Ruth? There is already links for both, to if someone would like to actually purchase it. So we will have a follow-up email about that. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I will read a few things that already came in. If, do you want to say a few words about Cuba right now? Like what is the situation in Cuba right now?
Yeah, well, I've not been back myself since 2020, so it's been exactly 4 years since I've been back personally to visit, but I'm staying in touch with people there, and definitely people are doing their best to maintain the religion, the traditions, the holidays. They had a big Purim party at the Patronato, which is like the big Jewish community center in Havana. The community has shrunk a little bit in these last few years. Some people left during the pandemic because the situation was really difficult. Economically, there are a lot of difficulties now, and there were some protests recently in the eastern end of Cuba, in Santiago and Bayamo. So there have been electricity shortages as well. So they're definitely going through a difficult time. The pandemic and post-pandemic time has been very, very difficult. There was a decline in tourism, and Cuba was really depending on tourism, but now I see that it's coming back again. As I was telling you before, Dora, that now there's a lot of interest in Jewish travel to Cuba again, and a lot of groups are going, which helps the community on the island by providing support for them, both monetary and moral support. So I think that they need us now more than ever to support in any way that we can. But the community's still there. It's still vibrant. Might be a little smaller than it was a few years ago, but they're still going on and being very strong in these difficult times.
Thank you. There were a few comments about sewing coins and jewelry into clothing. That Dean wrote that his family and his wife's family, when they left Poland and Russia, also did the same. And then there is another comment from Sylvia that her Italian Jewish aunt also sewed jewelry into her underwear when fleeing in 1943. So that's also a bit of
A lot of
something that
history.
appears in different locations and different times. So I thought that was interesting. You're welcome to comment on it.
Yeah, maybe I would just add that so in the very first section with Benvenida, when she's leaving Toledo, she sews the parchments with her poems into the hem of her robe as well, because girls aren't supposed to be writing poetry. So the poetry is sewn. She sews the poetry into the hem of her dress, and then when she gets to Naples and meets her aunt makes a better dress or robe for her where she can hide her poems. So it goes back in my story, it goes back to the 15th century, but it's interesting to hear about this idea of sewing it into garments to be able to hold on to really, these are things that one treasures, if it's a Jewish star that's been passed on from generation to generation, they didn't want it to get lost. And so that's why her Reina sewing it into Alegra's hem. But many, many Cubans did that as well as they left the island.
Thank you. Reina, you wrote that you have a question. Would you like to unmute? Okay, while we wait for Reina, or
Okay,
there
I'm
you
here. I didn't know how to. Yes, I my question for Ruth is my great grandparents, they were kicked out of Spain because they did not want to convert into Catholicism. So they travel, I don't know how their travel experience or how they ended up in El Salvador.
Mm.
And that's where they established. They established a small town that they call him Jerusalem, and they also named the river Rio de Jordan. So, but I'm trying just to find out how was their adventure, how they got there. I don't know where to start. They were Sephardic,
Well,
Sephardic Jews.
one person that comes to mind immediately,
have.
who's also Cubana, is Jeannie Milgram. And there's a new documentary about her life, and she is really interesting. She was brought up Cuban Catholic, but she always felt that she was convinced that she had a Jewish background, and she investigated this and did archival work in Spain and found the town that her family was from and found out that they were conversos who lived in this town in Spain for a very, very long time. It's on the border with Portugal, and then eventually went to Cuba. And she discovered this and then converted to Judaism herself. And so there's a new documentary about her life. I haven't had a chance to see it yet. Her name is Jeannie, Genie, Milgram, Milgrom. And she just comes to mind because she's done so much research on conversos. And for a long time, she was also the president of the Crypto Judaism group, I think it is. So she might be a good person to contact and see if she can tell you where to get started on your research.
Can you spell out her name for again, please?
Yeah, let me see if I can write it over here as well.
Mhm.
See if this works. Tell me if you can see it there on the chat.
Oh, Jeannie Milgram. Okay,
Yeah,
Jeannie Milgram. Okay, thank
hope that's
you.
helpful. Can't think of anybody else right
Yeah.
now that would know as much as she does.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I just found out a few years ago that I'm Jewish, I'm Sephardic, and I had some feelings in me, things that I like, and so many things that I was feeling inside of me, but I didn't know exactly. I thought they were from Spain, but I found out that no, they have to leave Spain because they did not want to convert into Catholicism. So, and they never talked to us about it because my grandfather got killed, and
Sorry.
I don't know if it was because he was Jew, but yeah, it's just that I want to find out because I want my grandkids to know about it. I want them to.
Mm. Thank you. That's such a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing with us. Really, really appreciate that, Reina. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I'm gonna buy your book.
Gracias, Reina.
Definitely. Sí,
Gracias.
claro. Gracias.
Qué amable. Gracias.
Abrazos.
Un abrazo para ti.
Gracias. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Reina.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, the next comment and question was from Rachel. I was especially touched by the letter announcing the death of Reina's mother and your description of it. Can you read it for us?
Of course, absolutely. Let me let me find it. Let's see.
The question
It's
is
a good
Behar.
question. I'm trying to see do you have the page number? I think this is it. She's holding the letter and talking about it, right? Is that the scene that we're looking at? I'll read from
I
there.
see Rachel nodding. Rachel, you can unmute if you would like,
Rachel?
but she was nodding when you said the page.
Okay, I'm going to read page
Thank you.
120 and 121. I'm assuming
I
that's
just
where.
want to tell you, I really enjoyed the book, but in this moment, I just, because you know my story, I also, my mother died across the sea. And so that was the most touching of all for me.
I can imagine.
So that's why I would like for you to share it with
Yeah,
people.
no, I will. I will. I'm just trying to see where to start. Start from here. Mama, what happened? Tell me, why did you scream like that? You scared me. She's holding a letter in her hand, one of the letters she receives every now and then from her sisters in Turkey, and now she is mumbling, my Mima, dear Mima, why couldn't you have waited a little longer so I could see you again? And that's how I learned that her mother, Mima, the grandmother I will never know, has died. I'm sorry, Mama. I hug her, feeling her wet cheeks. Tell me what it says in the letter. I know so little about my mother's past. Every time a letter arrives from her sisters, Susie and Dina, she reads it over and over, cherishing every word. But when I ask about her life in Turkey and why only she came to Cuba, all she'll say is that she was sent here when she was 12 to be her aunt's companion. Come, let's sit on the balcony. It's time I tell you more, she says. It's late in the afternoon and the sun is fading. We hear the mournful horn of the lanchita, the ferry that goes back and forth from Havana to Regla as it sets off yet again across the harbor. Mama turns to me and says, when I left Silivri, I always thought I'd get to go back to visit my family one day. And even though your papa and I only make enough money to live day to day, I never lost hope. But now she's gone. Why didn't your family come with you to Cuba? Tell me, Mama. Did you come all by yourself? I traveled here with Tia Simbul to this very apartment. Then after I married your papa, she stayed with us till she died, right before you children were born. You've never told me how you met papa. How did you decide to marry him? I didn't decide. My father decided. What? I don't understand. It was an arranged marriage. I had no say in it. I didn't meet your father until I arrived in Cuba. Mama, you didn't marry papa when you were only 12. That's my age. No, hijika. He agreed to wait until I was 15. Oh, Mama, that's so young, and I can't believe you didn't get to decide for yourself if you wanted to marry. Things were different when I was young. Arranged marriages weren't such an unusual thing back then. She looks down at the letter in her hand, runs a finger across the Turkish stamps. Then she continues, what was sad was that my father stopped talking to me before I left Turkey and hasn't written a word to me since. Your papa tried to smooth things out with him. He wrote and told him what a good wife I was, but it was useless. He refuses to forgive me. He's still alive in Silivri. Would you believe it? He is 20 years older than dear Mima. How is it possible that she died first? Mama, what did you do to make your father so angry? It was all because of a song, Allegra. If I hadn't wanted to sing it so much one night long ago, perhaps I'd still be in Turkey.
Thank you. Thank you
There
so
you
much, Ruth. That was beautiful.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Um, the next question was, why did you choose to write for a young audience? And how was this book related to your own quest to explore your Sephardic identity? And how did it change you? Journey. It's a
Well,
lot of questions in one.
all great questions, phenomenal questions. I asked them of myself. I didn't know that I was going to write books for young people, but I started writing a book called Lucky Broken Girl. I started it about 10 years ago, a little less, and it was a book based on my story as a Cuban Jewish immigrant girl arriving in New York in the 60s and being in a terrible car accident and having to be in a body cast for close to a year. So I wrote that book from the 10-year-old girl's perspective, because that's how old I was when that actually happened to me. And somehow I just started writing as a 10-year-old girl and realized after I'd written the whole manuscript that it was a book for young people, or a book that young people could read, a book that a 10-year-old could read. Of course, an adult could read it too, but I realized, oh, maybe I'm writing for kids. And so, reached out to an agent who focuses on kid literature and then an editor who does. And I just kind of jumped into this new career of writing for young people once I wrote that book. This is the nice thing about becoming a writer is once you write one book, then they want more books from you. So then, all right, I have to write another book. So then I wrote Letters from Cuba, which is about my other grandmother, my maternal Ashkenazi grandmother. So I wrote that book all in the form of letters, and then decided that my other grandmother, my Sephardic grandmother, also deserved a book in her honor, and started writing it. And so it's just been lovely entering into this community. Today I spoke at a school, and it's just amazing to have sixth or seventh graders reading your books. And you forget, or I think we all forget as we get older, like how smart we are when we're 10, 11, 12 years old. I mean, they're young, but they pick up every detail of what you write. And so I've been enjoying writing for this younger audience. But this book in particular, I feel like this book is for both. I feel like this book, definitely an 11 or a 12-year-old can read it and comprehend everything that's in the book, but I also feel that it's a book that's a crossover and can also be read by adults because the structure and just the stories themselves, I think, are captivating in a certain way that an adult can enjoy too and not find them too simplistic. I've always liked books as a young person. I didn't like books that talked down to me or that made me feel like I was a silly kid. I didn't have patience for those kinds of books when I was young. And so I'm trying to write books that are for young people, but that really respect the intelligence of and the knowledge that young people have. So that's what's led me into that universe, though I do have a novel that I set aside a while ago, that I started writing more than 20 years ago, that is an adult novel about Cuba, that is about nightgowns. And I set it aside and just couldn't get it to come out right, but I'm determined to come back to it. So I do want to write a novel that is for adult, specifically for adult readership, but right now I've been writing for this slightly younger audience and just really enjoying it. And for me, I think it's important to be bringing Sephardic and, Latino, Jewish, Cuban Jewish themes into literature for younger people because, we're so interested now in diversity and different kinds of Jewish communities, different kinds of Latino or Latinx communities. And so I think it's important for kids to have access to this knowledge and this literature from a young age and not to have to wait, till they're 18 or 19 or older to read these kinds of stories. So I'm also in my own very humble way, trying to fill in some gaps in the literature that exists for young people.
Thank you. And about the question about your own Sephardic journey and how you explore this through this book.
Yeah, well, it was exploring it through these four girls and kind of, I feel like there's a part of me in each of these girls. I mean, obviously I wrote the stories, so they've come from me, but in each of them, I feel like there's like a little piece of my Sephardic identity, which comes from my father. So addressing some of those complex relationships between fathers and daughters is in the book. And then the way I come to my Sephardic identity through food. Food is an important part of the book, but particularly the poetry and the songs are such an important way that we connect with our Sephardic heritage. So I wanted that to be a crucial part of the book. And so I was listening to the songs as I was writing, and just again, like just as I said at the beginning, that the community left Spain singing, and so song is so important, and that's one of the ways that I think so many people access this heritage, is through poetry and art and music and food. Those are really crucial.
Thank you. The family goes to Naples before going to Turkey. Can you address this, why that happens, or you speak about that in the book?
Yeah, so that's my understanding from the research that I did, that a lot of the Jews who left Spain in that era didn't go directly to the Ottoman Empire, but made several stops. Some went in the western direction towards Portugal, and I thought of that. I thought of, would they take that journey? But since my own family took the journey towards the Ottoman Empire, I thought it would make more sense. When I did my 23andMe, or my ancestry, testing, I found, and was able to do my father's too, which was great, but found that there was definitely some background that was Italian. So I thought, oh, this is possible, and I read that many in the community did stop in Naples first, which at the time was still initially accepting these Jewish migrants, and then afterwards started closing up. And so then people went on to what is now Greece and Turkey, but at the time was the Ottoman Empire. So it seemed to make sense that it wouldn't be an easy journey, just like, okay, now we're going to the place where we're going to live for many centuries, but they had to make several stops to get to the Ottoman Empire.
Thank you. I see a lot of comments and everyone thanking you for the wonderful presentation, and also some discussions about certain topics. You touched upon it already a little bit, but did you get feedback, or what kind of feedback did you get from the younger audiences about the book?
Well, I've gotten some. In fact, I have to write back to here's some feedback. I received a fan letter from a young reader. So I have to write back. This is Molly. Molly just read Across So Many Seas, and she loved the book. I have to write back to Molly. So yeah, no, so I think young people are enjoying it. They're enjoying the idea of the four stories, which I also enjoyed writing because I wasn't sure how they would all connect. And part of the fun of writing the book was figuring out how will they connect. And so I think for a reader, they're reading it and going, okay, how is this? How are all these stories? They're interesting stories, but how are the four going to come together? And so I think there's kind of a pleasure in reading the book and knowing that you need to read to the end, which is always fun when reading to kind of understand the mystery or what's the full story. So young people seem to be enjoying it. The ones that I've spoken to so far seem to be very interested in it, and some are saying to me that they're so glad to learn more about Sephardic Jews, that they feel that it's something that they just don't know that much about. The oud, the instrument of the oud, is not something, like this Molly wrote to me and said, "Oh, I did all this research on the oud. I didn't know about this instrument and this music." So I feel that for some of the young readers, it's a discovery process reading the book and just learning about a culture and a community that they didn't know about, but that they find interesting. And then others are just enjoying the structure of the book and how the stories come together. So yeah, so far I'm getting a good response from what I know so far. But the book just came out 2 months ago, so we're really at the very beginning.
Thank you. And a question about your name. Is Behar an exclusively Jewish name, or do you know non-Jews from Spain who have this name?
Yeah, both do. So Behar is often spelled with a J, and there is a town in Spain called Behar, Bejar, with the accent on the E. I've been there many times, and interestingly, for those of you that haven't been, there's a Jewish museum in Behar. When I first went there back in the 80s, no one seemed to know anything about the Jewish heritage of Behar, and then people in the community itself in Behar started investigating. The ayuntamiento, the municipality, started investigating, and then this Jewish man who was actually from Barcelona but studied in the Behar region, engineering in that region, he helped to fund this Jewish museum in Behar. So it's very, very interesting. And, we don't know for sure. I wrote about this. I have an essay about this reunion that took place in Behar that's in my book called Traveling Heavy. So several years ago, a whole group of us who have the Behar last name spelled with an H all got together in Behar, spelled with a J, and to see if we somehow descend or have roots in this town. We couldn't find anything conclusive, but a lot of people that went on this journey, there were like 70 of us, decided in no uncertain terms that we are from Behar. And maybe we are, why not? I would be happy to be from Behar. It's near Portugal, it's near Salamanca, there and near the mountains. And what we do know is that many Jews left the central areas of what is now Spain, and moved towards Behar to eventually get to Portugal, as they were leaving even before 1492. So there may have been an important Jewish presence in that area. So to this day, what I largely see is that people that have the spelling with the H tend to be Sephardic Jews, and those who have the spelling with the J tend to be not Jewish. But this is only like anecdotally. I haven't really, studied it systematically. But there are people with the Behar last name who are not Jewish, but with the H, it tends to be people who are Sephardic, at least from this meeting that we had there.
Thank you so much. So we're getting to the end of our time, so we're going to close. Diane, would you like to, I see that your hand is raised. That can be the last question.
Thanks. Well, the second part of my question was, I have a friend was raised Christian, and she's convinced, her last name is Behar, and she's convinced that she's from Jewish, ancestry, but she can't quite prove it. So I think she even did DNA testing. But so that's why I wanted to know if Behar was an exclusively Jewish name or not. Well, she's
See,
not.
I don't think it is. I don't think it is. I know that I've come across the name in Cuba, even Peru and other places, and at least those instances that the people have not been Jewish who carry the name. So it probably is a mix of both, and there may be again some connection to the town, possibly, though, Behar and Behor and Bahar also mean things in Hebrew, and the genealogist that met with us when we all got together, and Behar was saying that it had more to do with Behor being the firstborn, and that Behar came from Behor. So, so that's a possibility too. He did not think that it had anything to do with the toponyms, but again, the Behars that were there did not agree with the genealogist. They definitely felt a connection to the place. So it might be. I think just more research is needed to find out more conclusively.
Well, definitely tell her about the town. It might be
Tell her about the town and the Jewish museum there. It's a very small but very interesting museum. I've been a few times, and the director really has put a lot of her love into it, and it would be great for more people to visit and really help them out so that it stays there.
Thank you so much. So before closing, I just want to tell you about two upcoming events that I think might be relevant for all of you here. Next week on Tuesday at the same time, we will have another free event which will introduce the Jewish heritage of Spain. And in the second part of this talk, we will talk about the Spain trip that Qesher is organizing in partnership with Jewish Spain Tour and Nora Kaplan Learning Trips. We are organizing a Sephardic heritage tour to Spain, which will visit also Toledo and also the south of Spain and Barcelona. So it's going to be very exciting, and maybe if some of you are interested in joining in this talk on next Tuesday, you will have the chance to find out both about the history of Spain and also about how this tour is going to be organized and what it will include. So we will send this also in the follow-up email. So if you're interested, you can join us next week. And this Sunday, we will have a talk about the Jewish community and history of Istanbul. It's also very related to today's session. So we will also share this event with you in tomorrow's follow-up email, as well as this recording and where you can get Ruth's book. So this is just a bit of our upcoming events. And now I want to thank one more time Ruth for sharing this wonderful talk with us and the story of your book. And I hope many people will have the chance to read it. And thank you everyone for being here and joining us. And I just want to pass the closing words back to Ruth before we say goodbye.
Well, thank you so much for everything. This was really lovely. Thanks to all of you for joining today and being here. It really is just so heartening and heart-filling. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for all your questions and listening and the comments. It's been really lovely. I hope I can get a copy of all the comments that are in the chat. I'm not able to see, I saw some of them, but couldn't see them all. Thank you so much. I see that there's an oud player. Definitely will follow up on that. Very interesting. So thank you so much, everybody. This has been lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. We will send the comments to you, of course.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Adiós, queridos y queridas.
Muchísimas gracias. Hasta luego.